Having a career session, partly because Biochemical Society often does this to help give you some insight into career development or lack of career development in science. And we've got on our panel Mike Perkington from AstraZeneca. Did you want to give a clap there?
We're going to have a little clap.
And one of my PhD students, Jake Dundee, here is in the fourth year of his PhD and is currently kind of looking for postdocs and stuff. So he's from the early stage. And then Svetlana doesn't want to be described as mid-career.
I'm end career.
But
so no.
I'll be giving some insight into lack of, I don't know what.
Everything you know to me.
Lack of career structure at the mid-career stage. And then Jenny Pocock from UCL is on, I don't know.
End stage. Feel like it, that's good.
Don't want to describe you as a later,
later
career stage from academia as opposed to from industry side of things.
I get the picture taken, guys.
So I don't know how you're going to organise this, but I had suggested that you talk about your careers and the challenges of your careers. So if you could kind of briefly start off, and then we would open it up to questions from the audience. And I don't know who would like to start.
I'll start.
Okay.
So I'll start with a PhD, because I did a PhD. I did a degree in London at what is now the University of Greenwich. And I did applied biology, so biochem, cell biology and physiology, and I did a year out at Kew, Royal Botanic Gardens Kew, and I learnt a lot of cell biology techniques, but at the end of that I thought, I'm not going to get a job here, it's all dead men's shoes, it's a brilliant place to work, but I thought, no, I'm not going to get a job, and I don't want to end up in some greenhouse in Norfolk, so I thought, what's the fastest growing field? And the fastest growing field then was neuroscience, so I thought, I'll shift to neuroscience. So I went off and did a PhD at University of Birmingham, and it was all looking at, a lot of people in the 80s were doing this, insect biology. It was a big thing. And then I had a case studentship with the Wellcome Labs at Berkhamsted. And I hate to say this, Mike, but I think that kind of put me off industry because the thing I noticed about it was I quite liked getting into stuff in detail. And what I noticed about the guys at the Wellcome Labs was not only were they Wellcome Labs 1 week, but then they were Cooper's Animal Health halfway through it. They were taken over, things were changing. They constantly were switching projects. And I thought, well, I don't really want to do that. I want to stick to something. I want to be able to build on something. So I'd also had case studentships myself with Lily, and I just thought, no, I wouldn't want to go into industry for that reason. That was my view. So after my PhD, I did a 1-year postdoc in Dundee in the biochem department, but I'd also contacted a group in California at the University of California, Riverside, because I really wanted to go to the US, and I thought, well, Dundee, a bit cold, I'll go to California. So I went to California for 2 years, postdoc. Literally, my view was, it's purely cynical. If you go for 2 years, you get a tax break. If you go for less than a year, you have to pay all your tax in the UK. If you go for more than a year and less than literally 2 years, big tax-free dodge. So I thought, well, I'm just going to go for 2 years and do what I did, which was brilliant, because what I did was I worked on spider venom as probes for ion channels, voltage-dependent calcium channels, and so, it was fantastic. It was like going out, catching these spiders. They weren't nothing horrible, but they were funnel webs, but they weren't funnel webs like Australian funnel webs. They were the funnel webs we actually get here, in the autumn when you see these big sheets in hedgerows and you see a big funnel. That's the kind of funnel web we were looking at. And you could catch them, and we were milking these funnel webs, believe it or not, giving them little shots and getting the venom out and then purifying it and then using enzyme probes. And so there I kind of got into applying it to, physiology and pharmacology. And so we worked on chick, rat, cockroach, believe it or not, ants and aptosomes. And then I wrote to my former boss in Dundee and said, look, got all these toxins, can we look at excitosis? Because he was a big neurotransmitter release guy. And so I went back there and we got funding from the MRC in Wellcome. So I was up there for about 6 years. And I just want to say something really funny about this. I've told my lab about this. I remember he was a bit... I'm not going to mention his name, but you can look him up.
I know who it is.
He was a bit exist. And I came back and I got married. And when I went back to the lab, he said, "Oh, you got married?" And I'm like, "Yeah, and then I remember once we were out for dinner with a visitor from Italy, and this Italian guy was asking me, "Do you have any kids?" And I said, "Oh, no, I'm not going to have kids as a postdoc." And my boss said, "But you can bring it in and put it under the bench." Oh yeah, a 2-year-old. So these are the silly things I got thrown at me, and I was just mad. I mean, there weren't that many women at the time. I remember when I did my PhD, there was just us 2 in the whole physiology department, 2 women. I mean, it was just bloody awful. But gradually, and I did wonder at the time when I did my degree, there was about 50-50. Women to men, or young people to men, and I just thought, where have they all gone? And I've had over 20 PhD students in my lab, and pretty much mix of female male. I know 3 people who have got lectureships, and they've all been male. Where do you all go? So there is that to think about. I don't know. I mean, maybe they'll go into industry. I think there are more women now. We went to the glial meeting. When I first went to the glial meeting in 97, there were hardly any women. Now we went to the big glial meeting in Berlin this summer, and it was like, more women than men. So the tide is changing, but I would say it's been a bit of a lonely experience at times because there's not been that many women. So that's the story of my life. I'm now at UCL. yeah. I'm now at UCL, professorship, and that'll do nicely, thank you. But any questions? I mean, I would say that, from my perspective, I would say you've really got to get publications out of your PhD, and you've got to ramp up the publications while you can. So I've always tried to get the students to get publications, and then to think about. I wouldn't necessarily encourage you staying in the same lab. I think because I moved around, you learn different techniques. I mean, I wouldn't have learned half the techniques if I just stayed in the same lab. I'd still be working on synaptosomes or something. So you do get a very good idea, and you get your own unique niche if you move around in different labs. So I'd advise that.
Would that be your top tip then?
Yeah, I think I'd say you've got to move around, get publications, move around. And obviously, it's difficult, but it is quite. I remember, you think about all the places I've lived, and it's a bit tedious. But on the other hand, it gives you a lot more techniques and a uniqueness that is more attractive to funders. Okay. Your turn.
Perhaps we could just have 1 or 2 quick questions, and then we go round the panel, and then we'll have a kind of more general afterwards.
Thank you. How much do you recommend a postdoc should move around? So PhD students should move around from the parent lab.
Well, I postdoced 1 year in Dundee, 2 years in California, and then 6 years in Scotland again. And then I got my lectureship in London. It just depends, it depends. I mean, Tom Pears, who was in my lab, he was in my lab as a PhD student. Then he went to Bristol. I think he was there for 3 years. And then he came back to my lab for 6 years. And now he's got a lectureship in Exeter. So, he's obviously done that. But I mean, it is hard. It is hard. But I think that's true of any job, really. As a professional, you do tend to move around. I mean, you ask the average medic, they'll be moving around. They won't be staying in the same place all the time. But, I mean, that's an academic job. I don't know what it's like elsewhere. Yeah, another question. Yeah, is that what you wanted to know?
It was similar. I was just wondering how much could moving around be seen as a downside to employers maybe thinking that they don't stick in one place for long enough to.
Oh, it depends what you gain from it. I mean, I definitely would. If I have, I kind of prefer people that have taken the initiative and moved about. I know people who haven't moved about and they've been fine, but in my view, they tend to be. They don't have the up-to-date techniques that you get from moving around, and they don't have their own. You're more likely to get a kind of niche if you've got all these different techniques under your belt. So yeah, I mean, I didn't start off as looking at microglia. I started looking at microglia when I moved to the institute. I just dropped everything else. So I did a bit of CGC stuff, obviously, because Guy and I do similar things. Because I was working on purely neuronal stuff, and I got into microglia. I knew that there would be a bit of grief if I took too much stuff from where I was in Dundee. So I thought, well, I'm just going to move and make my own completely separate area. So there is that as well. And you can bring in what you've learned in other labs. And I did have a kid, but that does that to your publications. So I didn't put him under the bench, though.
You had a question?
That's where you went wrong, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah, so sometimes when it comes to moving around, there's a little bit of the sense of you have to go and do a postdoc in the US. Would you say that's necessarily true, or is it more just about finding the right labs and finding
I think it's about finding the right labs. I mean, I suppose, I mean, I did my degree in London. I wanted to go to London to do my degree. And then afterwards, it didn't matter where I went. And then I wanted to go to the US to do a postdoc, just because I wanted the experience. And I mean, when I worked in Dundee, I mean, I'll tell you what, it definitely, oh my God, it made me much more competitive, which may not be a good thing in some respects, but I know my lab boss in Dundee, there were two of us, he'd come back from the US, and he said, I'm never employing anybody who's done postdocs in the US again, because we were like, I mean, it definitely made me more driven, I think, actually. Maybe competitive is not the word, driven. Which may not be good, I don't know. I'm not as driven as I used to be, that's for sure.
Any other questions for Jenny before we move on? Okay, Svetlana, would you like to give us a little overview of your career and the challenges?
Absolutely. So, hi everyone, I'm Svetlana. I'm a PI currently at the Department of Biochemistry in Cambridge. So I did my master's and then my PhD actually in a biochemical lab in Russia. And then I imported myself into the UK with love, obviously. And, I mean, Russian science is something very different than what we do here. So it was kind of more biotechnology, biocatalysts. And I actually graduated as a chemist, and I hated chemistry by the end of it because it was more about cooking compounds, in a dish, in the microwave to make them more magneto-resistant. Okay, thank you very much. So then when I came to the UK, I came for a postdoc in Oxford, and I did my postdoc on something completely different, something I didn't know anything about. And I thought that was actually a great way to do it. Of course, with the prospect that I'm going to potentially stay in this field or near this field. And I found it very exciting at the time. And that was DNA repair, actually. So I worked on basic excision repair, which is the main pathway for the repair of endogenous DNA lesions. And then by the end of my postdoc, which was 3-year term, I was doing well. And I thought I could either go and do a postdoc elsewhere, or I could capitalize on what I have and get a couple of more publications out, and then see if I can actually become independent at that point. And I actually took the second route. So I stayed in the same lab. There was a way to become, I got promoted to senior postdoc, got a bit more cash, which was nice, and Oxford is lovely as well. And it worked out. So by the probably overall 5.5 years of my postdoc, I couldn't be in the lab anymore. I pretty much hated the science we were doing, and I hated the PI as well, a little bit, not personally, but kind of professionally. You get to the point that you feel you've got to go. And that, I think, was the point where I was ready to move on, which is exactly what I did. So I applied for a Wellcome Trust Sir Henry Dale at that point fellowship, which is now a career development fellowship, as far as I remember it's called, with all the restructuring. And I took that fellowship to biochemistry in Cambridge. Now, the fellowship is for 5 years. So if you ever go down this route, you need to realize 5 years is not enough, especially if you're starting from scratch, or if you're slightly shifting your focus, your scientific focus, and you perhaps don't have much preliminary data. Well, it depends. I mean, obviously, when you get a grant, when you receive this fellowship, you do have preliminary data and some wonderful ideas, which are then assessed by your reviewers. But yes, 5 years is not enough. So, and this is the main challenge, because in these 5 years, you've got to produce some senior author publications to then prove to your department or departments elsewhere that you're worthy of a tenured position, or you're worthy of near tenure, something a little bit more advanced than just a standard tenure track, right? So I suppose my advice here is make sure that your postdoc mentor is a wonderful person. Because if your postdoc mentor is supportive of you and they see something in you, right, then there's a chance that you would actually have some time to think about your ideas, not just theoretically, but maybe practically, maybe do a few experiments to probe that project that you're proposing for a fellowship, that it is going to work. And it is going to give you that output. And it's not like you set up your own lab, which takes a couple of years, actually, to get everything going, to make sure that the techniques are okay, and that the water is exactly the same as the water in your previous institution. So your reactions go forward and not backwards, right? So things like this. And then you actually have, this start, yeah? Some people also like to change actually field a little bit, which was my case actually, kind of shifted fields. So again, that takes time, and that means that 5 years is actually not enough to produce sufficient perhaps, or great quality output that makes your life easier at a later stage. But otherwise, it's a wonderful time in your career. So have fun, enjoy it, go to, take your fellowships if that's what you do, or, apply for lectureships in all these wonderful and, otherwise places that you never thought of. And do great science, you'll be great.
Awesome. Any questions for Svetlana?
Hi, thank you for sharing your experience. I know Wellcome are shifting towards supporting early career researchers now, where they're going to have a lot of funding for people who have had 2 years of postdoc experience max, and they're going to get funding for about 5 years of being basically baby PIs with the intention of becoming a PI at the end. And to me, it seems very fast-tracked, only having sort of 2 years experience beforehand. Would you suggest going for something like that? Would you have gone for something like that?
I mean, effectively, it is a postdoctoral fellowship, isn't it?
Yeah, for
right? Yeah. So, what they're testing for in this particular scheme is whether you, having been for 2 years, doing well, postdoctoral, so semi-independent research, right? Whether you have interest in ideas. And I don't think this particular program actually requires you to come up with this wonderful project proposal on your own. This is actually, at that stage, as far as I remember the scheme, it is a collaboration with your PI. So it's no different from effectively you applying to a postdoc, except for you get this wonderful experience of actually writing a proposal, and you would probably have to have something on your CV publication-wise, or something, it's either a great proposal or maybe, by 2 years of postdoc, I mean, you would have hopefully first author publication, maybe something else that you contributed to from your PhD, and that gives you a fair chance actually to do it. But what I do with people in my lab after they've been in my lab for 6-9 months, I get them to actually write a proposal. I say to them, look, you've been working on this project for a few months. Why don't you write 3-4 page something that is a derivative of what we plan to do, or something that you could potentially have done yourself if you had a chance. It's the same exercise, but it is incredibly prestigious. It gives you a chance to actually take it wherever you want, right? So yes, you should try it.
And I think they also give you money to have a research assistant as well. I think that's what made me think maybe you're supposed to almost be your own PI quite soon, because you have people under you.
Yeah, well, some of us would be ready for that in 2-year term of postdoc, yeah? Looking back at my own career, I was nowhere near ready to do something like that. But what I could have done, if I knew about such opportunity, or if it existed, right, and I was mature enough actually to take it, then I would have made a deal with a PI, I would have embedded myself into somebody's lab. And I would have made it a team under a team. And, it's beneficial to both you and your host.
Yeah. Just on that caveat, I remember as a postdoc making sure, or as a PhD student, actually, I did supervise undergrads projects. And as a postdoc, I supervised undergraduates and PhD students. So that is one thing you can get into, where you can learn to supervise people. It's not something that everybody knows how to do. You really do need practice at it. So you might want to try that.
Yeah. And it's also overall a great practice for actually becoming a PI, because, we're trained to be great scientists. We're certainly not trained to be responsible for a team, which entails bureaucracy within your department, sitting on finance committees. God knows what they're talking about, right? So, the whole body of things that you would actually need to do. And here, what you end up doing, you end up managing the budget, right? I mean, it's not actually easy. It's not difficult, right? But it's something that, again, we never think about. I mean, we think about ordering perhaps things, but actually, looking at it from a bigger perspective, perhaps, is, great training, fantastic training. Thank you.
As a general thing, I think it's important to keep going up as quickly as possible. So after the first postdoc, you really should be looking for fellowships, and after the first fellowship, you should be looking for something much better. You've got to be as ambitious as possible and ascend as rapidly as possible, because it's a very competitive market out there for academic positions or industry. You've just got to keep going up, and you've just got to keep pushing yourself, looking for the best thing you can find.
Yeah, and the life will correct you. If you're overly ambitious.
Yeah, I've known people at our place who've got junior fellowships. Then once you get a senior fellowship, the university, well, in fact, I know somebody did this because my husband did it, but the university almost has to go, yeah, we'll give you a job at the end of it. And I know quite a few people who've gone that route. So once you get a senior fellowship, you're like, you give me the job, or, I'm off. So there is that route as well, but it's hard, it's very competitive, but people do it.
So thank you for sharing. So I think I'm in a similar position as you, as a new PI in Oxford and trying to have my grant. So I think we like pain if I can say, because it's a step-by-step stressful position, because you start as a PhD trying to do your own research, then you do your papers and you try to understand how to write, and then you go into a postdoc, and then you do the grants, and then you're still always in this motivating, the stressful position trying to supervise people. One of my questions is, did you felt a switch in the way of managing people? Because, for example, it's not the same to supervise a PhD when you're a postdoc and supervising a PhD when you hold your own grants. Or, I mean, it was my feeling. So what is your feeling about this?
Yeah, that's a difficult one. I mean, that's one thing we haven't learned in our postdoc. However, we supervised people, right? We haven't learned people management. Well, I personally think that it took me about 4 years to actually learn how to be a PI, kind of the onboarding thing, right? And, about that benchmark, I thought, oh, well, actually, I'm beginning to grasp it. And it's a very interesting way of self-reflection, actually, on the time that you spend doing it. I think that it's very difficult, to hire somebody and get what you basically expect to get, right? I mean, we all get it wrong. And I think we're all learning this art of hiring and managing people throughout our careers. I mean, I've spoken to, people who are, finishing up their scientific careers in very prominent positions. And they would say that, I've been learning throughout my career and never stopped. And even now I make mistakes, right? But it's about getting the best out of every person that you have in your lab. And how to do it, I mean, the strategy is so very different for every person again. One thing that I would probably advise to do is there is an EMBA course, for example, on how to run a lab for new PIs. And it is incredibly useful because you go there for, you go to Heidelberg, I think, for 2-3 days, and they basically coach you. And it's incredibly useful at the beginning of your career as a PI. I mean, I wouldn't mind actually doing it again now because I would get a lot more from it now, having the experiences that I've had in the last few years. But also, there are lots of different programs in many universities and institutes.
We have to go on a course before you could even, which was quite funny because a lot of us were established PIs and we still had to go on this course. But it was actually quite useful because there were young PIs and there was us, and we were able to say, right, these are the problems we've had with students, or we've had this experience. So, I mean, I'm sure you should look into that at Oxford. That was very useful for, I didn't have anything like that. We were just, you're a recognised university lecturer, off you go. So we all had to learn. But I mean, I would say, everybody's different. I think everybody in my lab that I've had, 20 or PhD students, they've all been different. They've all got their own ways of working. It's just a question of switching into the way that they work. But I think that's something you learn with experience.
Yeah, I agree with the problem is also when we start is that, the term, even PI, is not the same for everyone. Yeah. What I mean is just when you start, you will maybe have, if you're lucky, 1 or 2 people who are working for you. But when you see the PIs, or your PI, or now it's your line manager, but at the end it's the same. So you have your own, supervisor at the end, and this one is for you, a PI, and you're not considering yourself as this. But then to jump in, I think we have to try, but it's difficult to go in at the beginning.
You also, I think, is, because you're young, right, when you start the lab, and, your people who work for you are very young, so there is no this age difference. It's not that it is important, right, but you're almost, at the level of being friends rather than, being a PI and a person who works in a lab. But I tell you, this is where aging is good. Because, you look different, right? So you perhaps are perceived differently. It's like, driving license and insurance, just the same thing.
God. Yeah, that's true.
I I have a question actually for you and for senior faculty as well. Like, as you said, 5-year time is not enough when you are sort of just jumping as a PI and trying to establish your own lab and being, let's say, microglia research. It's very competitive and it's really hard to keep up with people who are already established in field. And in that 5 years time, if you don't produce a great result, it's really hard, and a lot of people even give up in those 5 years or after those 5 years. So my question is to senior faculty: how do you look at these new PI and how we should approach you, or how would you actually help us to sort of maybe get into a collaboration and help us to sort of grow basically? I don't know, it's a bit tricky, but
This is addressed to me. We don't bite, I mean, you can just come and talk to us and say, can we do this, that, and the other? That's how I view it. But also, I mean, when I started in the microglial field, there weren't that many of us. There's probably Guy, me, and a few people working on microglia in the UK. And it's just exploded. So there is going to be more competition. So maybe you kind of, I mean, yeah, it's tricky, but I would just approach people. If you want to collaborate with them or you want some help, just approach people. That's what I would recommend.
I always find as well, PIs are so busy, as they should be. Don't be afraid to double email a PI. It's not because they've ignored your email purposefully. It's because they're talking to a million other people about a million other things as well.
Yeah.
I remember when I actually was looking to work with Guy for the first time. I think one of our early communications, I needed some information from him. But I remember I emailed him twice because I needed to. Because I was like, I need this information for this, this to go through. And Guy responded, pretty soon after. I don't take it personally. I think Guy's busy. He's got stuff to do. And PI's like that as well. They're not actively ignoring you. They want to help you. They want to collaborate. People love, hearing your ideas and how they can get their research in. But they're also really busy. And that's fine. So don't be afraid to badger them a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, one thing I'd like to add is, technology is a devil, isn't it? You get 100 emails a day, and all you do is to try to press delete if possible. Yeah. You have this urge to do that. So, if you're after someone who's in close proximity, the best thing is grab a cup of coffee, knock on the door, and say hi. I'm really sorry to show up and announce, but I've got this great idea.
Yeah,
5 minutes of your time, and have a speech ready for those 5 minutes. Because if in 5 minutes, you can sell your idea yourself, then it results in a collaboration. And it's so much nicer to do it this way. I don't know why we don't do it more often. I mean, I'd love to, right?
It's the easiest way.
Yeah.
Well,
and
unless you're in a different country, I suppose. It's not
well, if you're, of course, that's absolutely different.
Yeah.
But also, when you choose this new environment for yourself, it's not a bad idea to actually go to a place where you can talk to people, because some of them are doing something similar to you. Well, somewhat, not necessarily so that you create competition, but you actually have the environment that could be supportive, rather than you going to somebody and saying, I'd like to do this, and they're saying, well, I mean, nobody does it here. I'm sorry. Yeah. So having, again, this core of potential support and people who would vote for you and who would help you and who would stand up for you, which could arise from professional overlap in the research that you do without obviously creating competition, is not a bad idea. Otherwise, you might end up isolated. And,
maybe we should move quickly to Jake. So Jake's a final year PhD has spent a little while looking for his first postdoc. So I thought it would be useful just to share his experience.
Great. It's just like I said, I'm Jake Dundee, final year PhD. I did my undergrad at University of Bath in biochemistry. I did it with an industry placement, so I went to Memphis, Tennessee, and went to St. Jude's Children's Research Hospital and worked there for a year in a lab loosely based on retinoblastoma. But honestly, that was a fantastic experience for me. It really was. It really, from the get-go, I was with a postdoc throughout that entire experience, and I said to her, I want to go to Cambridge. I want to go to the best school in the UK. And she was like, okay, let's make it happen. And she was fantastic. She let me get involved in all the different experiments she was getting on. Because, that placement could have been just me doing PCR nonstop for a year. But she let me get involved in all these different things and making my kind of experiences or the things I wanted to do in my career, known to my superior and the postdoc there, but also to tell Guy, where I want my career to go as well. And with that, good communication, it's really helped me in my PhD and before that as well in looking at my career path and also helping the person help me, get to where I want to be. Because basically, if you've got a good boss, which I hopefully you do, they want you to succeed as well, and they want you to get to get to Cambridge, get to that fantastic fellowship later on in life, and get to go work on that fantastic get that cell on Nature paper or whatever. And they want to do it for you to see you grow and to see you grow as a scientist. But they also want to do it because they want to be like, oh, I did that, And it's great. It's a great feeling to know that I had the really positive impact on that person in this way. So like I said, I then started PhD in Cambridge, and in terms of challenges, I think classic kind of PhD challenges, right? You try an experiment, expect it to go one way, and it doesn't work in your hands for whatever reason. So a lot of optimization, a lot of trying different experiments and trying different assays, and a lot of negative data. But I think throughout all that, that's kind of one of the redefining factors of a PhD, and actually sets you up well if you in your mind and whether you want to go into academia, for example, is how do you cope in those situations, right? Obviously, not every PhD is different. Some people have it a lot rougher. Some people have it a lot easier. But in academia, there's a lot of things not working. There's a lot of stuff isn't going to that crucial bit of data that would have been brilliant and would have fit perfectly into that Nature paper. It's not the way I thought it was going to turn out. And persevering with that is actually kind of the most key things of kind of asserting to yourself whether, okay, is academia the right thing for me? Because kind of, I think what Jenny was saying there, one of the reasons why she kind of jumped from industry, for example, she loves getting really deep into the science, which you can really do in academia. And that is a really great thing. But also, it can sometimes be a very long road, which is great if you love, traveling down it, but it's not for everyone, for sure. And it's like I said, it's very competitive, and it's very hard. I've also just gotten married as well about a year or so ago. Oh, thank you. And now I'm, before pre-marriage, Jake was like, oh yes, I'm going to be working, crazy hours. I'm going to, dedicate all my time to academia. I can't wait. And now I'm like, I might want kids someday. I know. So it's like, well, I can't do that anymore. I've got another whole person I need to respect in that way, and I can't dedicate that sort of time to a job in that way, like I could have done before. So then in that, there's a lot of things. There's a lot of. This is kind of fun thing. Someone at the department mentioned this to me in that, you go as far as you can, travel as much as you can now while you're young, especially while you're not tied down. Because especially in academia, right? As soon as if you do get married to someone, you are going to be limited in different places you can go, and that's not a bad thing.
Not necessarily though.
No.
My husband buggered off to Australia for a year when I had a 9-year-old. Went off to set up UCL Australia, and I was left with a 9-year-old to look after. So it still gets done.
That probably saved your marriage, though.
Well, yeah,
in the end.
yeah, it probably did. But yeah, so.
But yeah, it's always a consideration, though, isn't it? And you're taking it's a two-body problem, right? And especially two academics as well. Is always that's double trouble.
Yeah.
Trying to get two people in the same department, most likely.
Yeah. Well, UCL was the first place my husband and I ended up together because we met in Dundee, and then I went to California, and he stayed in Dundee, and then he went to British Columbia, and then we both went back to Scotland. I went to Dundee, he went to Edinburgh, and then we got back at UCL together. So yeah, it was a long haul. It is two-body problem, as you say.
Jake, so top tips for getting a postdoc?
Top tips for getting a postdoc. So I've actually just been accepted to have a postdoc in the States. I'm going to go to Houston, Texas. I'm working in a lab there, which I'm really excited for. It's going to be great. Honestly, open yourself up to all the different opportunities. You're actually, I would say you're in a really good spot right now. In terms of, when I was looking, there's a lot of good postdoc opportunities. Every website I was looking on was like hiring for postdocs, hiring for postdocs, hiring for postdocs. I don't know whether that's, academics are finding it hard to hire postdocs right now. I can't speak to that in the same way. Maybe Svetlana
I
and
think since Brexit, it has got harder. The B word.
the B word.
Yeah, it's definitely got harder.
But you're in a good spot. And like someone was mentioning about the States, I think, well, like I said, I was there for a year, and I was super keen to go back because it can be a somewhat different atmosphere there as well. And some of the stereotypes are true. I was kind of my first experience of a lab, and it was super intense and super fun, and it was really full on. And I remember I came to the UK, and it was like, all right, we got 10 o'clock tea break, and then we have lunch at 1, and then we have a 3 o'clock tea break as well. We must go to that. But it's a very different lifestyle, and that's not a bad thing at all. But it's great to experience. It's really great to experience.
Mm-hmm. I'd say the biochem department where I was in Dundee was like being in the US. It was all full on. You could go in the lab at any time, and there'd be people there. Whereas when I came to London, it was like, where is everybody? Obviously not working that late because of the commute. People commute more and they just want to go home.
Questions for Jake? Emily.
Hello. Okay. This is kind of for everyone, but and I don't know if I'm going to articulate it properly. But to what extent do you think that, like, basically what you said about you got to keep going and going and going? Do you think that the focus on career progression is unique to science or academia, or is it just a product of the fact that we're literally in a career session now? That it seems sometimes almost to like displace the focus on science or work?
I think it's not unique to this profession. I think it's, you go into law or you go into any area, it's the same.
Is it like, do you think it doesn't detract from like the work, the focus on constantly going? Like,
I don't think so.
Yeah, I think if you're really
think...
driven by it, you're driven by what you're doing, then you want to do it. If you're not driven by it, that might be a signal that maybe not for me.
And I guess the faster you climb up, right, the faster you get to do you get to be the PI, right? You get to decide what's going on. Obviously, we have like sort of autonomy, what I want to do for my project, for example, as a PhD. But ultimately, I'm working on P2Y6, and that's because Guy's got money to work on P2Y6, and he's decided that's a really important gene receptor we need to work on. If you're a PI, you get that control. And obviously, there's limitations in terms of getting grant funding, but you still get to choose what grants you're applying for and what projects you want to put your name to. And that is quite fun, really.
Yeah, then you start seeing grant funding rejections in your dreams. I mean, but, one thing to say, I think as we progress up the career ladder, at some point it becomes not a job, right? It becomes what you love, basically, right? And, at that level, it doesn't really matter.
I remember the guy that I did work for in Dundee said to me once that having a career in academia was being paid to play. I'm not sure I'd call it quite that, but I do think you never go home bored.
Yeah.
You're never bored. I mean, okay.
It's fun.
Writing grants can be a bit stressful, incredibly stressful. But I wouldn't say I'm ever bored.
Yeah.
So, depends what kind of life you want.
Well, if you want any.
Yeah,
I need to...
some people So go on.
Would you like to speak now?
Oh, God.
Shall I say something? No. Can I open this one up by just having a show of hands of who would consider making a move to do their science and biology in industry instead of academia?
Can I join?
Would you be surprised to know that nearly everyone I employ came from academia?
Well, you've got to get your PhD somewhere, haven't you?
or early academia. Okay, so let me tell you about my story. I'm a story of hard work pays, not talent. Talent gets you so far, hard work can trump that sometimes. Let's just put that one out there.
Well, I think
and I would say I fall into that bracket of really hard work, can get you places, and talent can too. But a combination of both is, I'd say we have people in that group who are super, super talented, but people that I see that work really, really hard as well, and they can both get to the same place. And my opinion is you follow your heart. You do what's right for you, okay? Your head and your heart. People who tell me that their career is by design, I tend to not trust or believe. Most people, it's not by design, I don't think. My career, I fell into it for 30 years and I'm still falling into it. So I was in academia for 17 years before I went into industry. So, and also another interesting fact is that you've got two bookends here that now work on microglia.
We collaborate.
They actually started their career also working on synaptosomes and calcium channels and toxins, because I did exactly the same.
Yeah.
Just my boss at the time, Talvinder, wouldn't let me publish any of it
Oh,
because he thought it was all a waste of time.
He was a postdoc. He was the other postdoc in the lab that was from the US. Was told,
Yeah,
me
and
and
I
him.
also didn't go to the US, and I don't believe you have to go to the US if you don't want to. Again, follow your heart, do what you want. There's loads of amazing places to stay and work here or in Europe. So yeah, degree at Edinburgh University, PhD at UCL, 4 or 5 postdocs, 2 research fellowships, got offered a lectureship, turned it down, had an epiphany, if you call it, and decided that I'll accept the job in industry that I was offered around the same time instead, because I just needed a change. I felt burnt out by academia 15 years ago. It was a place of, and I don't know if it's changed, tell me if it has, 0 career ladder for non-clinical academics.
I think so. And what's also...
And I hope it's changed.
Yeah, what's also frustrating, I work with alongside clinicians who have PhDs, and they earn double my salary.
Yeah.
It's very annoying. And they're doing the same thing. Okay, they might have clinical duties as well, but because they're on the clinical scale, you think, ooh, so it can be annoying.
I kind of just took the view, like, I didn't want to publish or perish anymore. I didn't want to write grants. I wanted to translate my research. What we do in AstraZeneca is not nearly as different as you would think to what academics do. I run a group of 12 people in our biology. I worked my way up to head of discovery now. I'm head of discovery for neuroscience and head of biology, having done some fellowships as well and then been a project leader in the company early on. But the people in my team are just doing their biology in a different way. They are exquisitely creative in their thinking and innovative in how they go about using all the technology that is just exactly the same as that in academia. We have access to everything from multi-omics to the highest state-of-the-art imaging to anything you can imagine that you can do in academia. We do it there, either externally with collaborators in academia or we have it in-house. And they absolutely adore the biology that they get to do, but it is different because it's so focused. And if you don't want to focus your biology and focus yourself down on you've got to be part of a big team, you're not just an independent researcher, you're working in a really matrix environment with other like-minded people, like you say, either extremely talented, hardworking, whatever you want to call it, but working to support each other in this matrix. And some people prefer that than just doing the old plowing the furrow of independent research, And there's pros and cons to both. But, developing assays, it's all around the drug, though, But, my team worked from identifying novel drug targets, which means we have huge, deep insight into biology and new biology that we either do with collaborators in academia or we do in-house now through, all sorts of omics data, AI, machine learning, and all that kind of area to evaluate targets, identify them, propose them, and then work on them to develop drugs. And all the way through that process, we're doing biology constantly. Biology, biology, biology. It's just applied in a very different way, but we're still doing it. It's just we're understanding how does the target modulate that biology instead of just saying, well, that's the biological pathway. So we sometimes have to accept that's the biological pathway, and we can't go so deep, like Jake said, into the pathway and keep doing it and keep doing it and keep doing it, plowing that furrow, going down tangents, which is all amazing as well. I did that in academia for 17 years, but we apply the biology really, really clearly now in a really focused way. And also, we have to be really strict. If the biology doesn't stack up, we drop it and we drop a project and we move on. So again, another difference is you've got to be prepared to be flexible, dynamic, and just move on to something else if you have to. But when I said we hire academics, it wasn't always the case. You can go and work in biotech and then you'd only pull people from biotech or from CROs. We directly pull people from Cambridge University, Oxford University, York University, Durham, Exeter, whatever, straight in now. Because a lot of people would say to me, I'll never get a job in the industry because I work in academia. It's not the truth at all. If you can, when you're writing your CV, show what your transferable skills are, your creative thinking skills, and all those kind of areas, you know, and why you want to make that move. You know, you'll get interviewed, do a presentation, competency-based kind of behavioural-based questions, you know, interview, and you're applying all that other transferable knowledge. You can do science and biology just in the same way in industry as you can in academia. It's just a different way of thinking about it and doing it, that's all.
So I hear, sorry, I'm going to just a quick question. I hear, Mike, that AstraZeneca closes its doors in labs at 5 p.m. and nobody's allowed to work overnight. Is that true?
It's not true.
Or is it a rumor?
Oh. People if they want to work at the weekends, but we don't necessarily encourage it because I think it's important to have life as well. But they'll, you know, 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock at night, the labs are open till, so it's not true.
Just checking.
They don't shut at 5 p.m.
I thought it was a great rumor.
They don't have beds. They don't have beds in the labs, like maybe some of the postdoc places I heard about in America that you're going to go to. No, I mean, people work.
It's a perk.
We're very flexible about it, but we have core hours, but we are really flexible about it. But
Thank you.
Everyone I speak to about going into industry says, oh, you need to get your first postdoc under your belt first.
yeah.
You can't just go straight from a PhD into industry. How true is that? Is that becoming less and less common, do you think?
It's not true. We have different gradations of bringing people in, and sometimes, depending on what we want, we'll want a relatively more junior scientist, so a PhD is often the minimum. But, you know, I'd say it's more, actually. So I'm a really bad example of what you should do to go into industry, because I went in after 4 or 5 postdocs, and normally you're done by then. You're not going to get in because you've been melded in the academic way for too long, and you're not believed to be changing. But I went in at a fairly senior level, and we do that as well. We bring people in at sort of those director, senior director levels who've been academics or even had lectureships or whatever. So you can go in at that level high up. The bit in between is hard. But I'd say a PhD, 1 postdoc, 2 postdocs is a sweet spot. You don't have to have done 1 or 2 postdocs necessarily.
Cool, thanks.
What I like about academia is that it gives you room to learn through your lifetime. So if my project is not working and I think there is something in it and I need to approach from different angle, I can tell my boss that I think something is there. I need 1 month to read and put something together, and I can come back to you. But what my friends in industry have told me that you cannot do that in industry. It doesn't give you that broad room to learn. Is it true?
To a degree, yes. I'm not going to lie to you. You can't just go off and be academic in your mindset when you're working on a drug project. It doesn't work like that. So unfortunately, no. You use your creative or innovative thinking in different ways, like I say, to develop cell biology or assays that are going to support drug projects. But that's not to say you can't develop. You know, we work on microglial signaling and TREM2, and we're doing all sorts of, you know, omics work to try and understand pathways that we can target, and then new drug targets. And you know, we work with Jenny and others. You know, I'm fascinated still. I'm an academic in my mindset still. It's just that I can't afford to be purely academic because I've got to run teams and run drug projects. But you can't just keep working on something, like you're saying, and you know, go on and on and on forever. There's time pressure in industry that maybe is different to the time pressures in academia. There are time pressures in both, but they're just different. You know, we have to deliver on projects and deliver go-no-goes on projects in a very specific way. And so you haven't got the freedom to just kind of keep going on something. You've always got to have in the back of your mind, right, this has got to lead to somewhere and to an end point at some point. And it's not like years down the line.
I think that's getting more and more true for academia as well, because we're getting more and more translational. You know, I mean, we're all, you know, how is this relevant, you know?
The last 10, 12 years.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say all my projects are now, I've got translational elements.
I think so. I mean,
yeah.
I mean, translational, you know, translational in academia and translational in drug discovery are 2 different things, but they're not really in preclinical discovery that I do. Translational there is very similar to what Jenny's talking about. Translational kind of there is much more that biology and preclinical kind of models, you know, translating. And we have much stronger relationships now with academia industry than we ever did have. There was always kind of like this wasn't a notion that you don't work with each other. There's a barrier there. We've really, people have tried to bridge that, I think, and you know, industry have met halfway there as well, not making such draconian restrictions on doing collaborative research agreements with academia as well, and vice versa, I hope.
So,
Thank you to all the speakers. It's been really enjoyable. I would just probably like to add a bit of contribution. So my background was in PhD in pharmacology, and I did some postdocs, then moved into a research institute in London where we were developing bioengineered tissues for transplantation, and then eventually moved into the industry. So I've been in the industry for 4.5 years now. Now, what I realized, obviously, working in the lab as a PhD student and postdoc, at the early stages, it was pretty much, that's what you're first exposed to, and everything you were thinking of is postdoc, fellowship, and, have an academic position. But then when I was at the research institute, was pretty much an element of translational stuff where, what you develop is being driven by clinical needs as well. So it's very, very team-focused sort of like effort. And I think the other person that spoke just now, in terms of even in the industry, you have the discovery phase as well, which is very customer-focused, where if you understand there's a gap in the market as well, then you can write your research questions. Because personally, for me, at some point when I was doing postdocs, like, okay, publish the paper, so what next? So I wanted to have an impact immediately. I want to see things develop in the lab and move straight into the market in the next few years. So I got excited in that way as well. And what you also realize is there's so many aspects in the industry which you can go into. If you love events, for example, and marketing, you can combine a lot of your marketing skills with your scientific skills and still have a lot of impact. If you love business development, if you love money making, so, you can go into sales. So there's quite a lot of fulfilling aspects of working in the industry. And if you love science, my previous job, I was the principal scientist, so I did quite a lot of grant writing, even though business writing is slightly different from academic grant writing, but you can see a lot of the skills you pick up from academia is transferable into the industry. I don't know if that...
Can I just add, I think you've made some really, really, really relevant points. Often a lot of people go in through biology and then they end up becoming project leaders or group leaders or translational biologists or project managers. There's loads of different careers eventually after time that you can just develop through into industry as well if you want. So you mentioned that, and it's a true point.
Great recruitment speeches, aren't they?
So I was just wondering about the academic freedom, right? Because that's one of the things that we really value about academia, sort of finding your niche and kind of pursuing that. And obviously, industry seems a little bit more prescribed. And the other side of this is also the openness, because we had a talk earlier today from BitBio, right? And what stood out to me in the answer to a couple of questions, the answer was, oh, I'm sorry, I cannot disclose that. And especially when it comes to an era of open science, I'm just kind of wondering, is there a shift in the industry towards also being open, more towards sharing the things you find with academic labs and publishing the stuff and things like that?
Absolutely. No, absolutely. I mean, so our head of, or former head of R&D biopharma, Mene Pangalos, who some of you may have heard of, has been always a huge proponent of, until, you don't share molecules and chemicals and all that, but biology and the data and everything, you put it out there and you share it, and you're really open and transparent about what you're doing. We used to be a closed shop like other pharma as well, and AstraZeneca were just the same, and he changed that mentality completely. We collaborate very openly with a number of people and publish a lot of papers. I think, again, I'm not trying to blow AZ's trumpet, but I think something like they published about 80 to 100 Nature journal papers per year from AstraZeneca, which is not an insignificant number. So, they do drug discovery, but at the core of it is scientific excellence. And yeah, it's about putting people and patients first, but actually it's about doing the best science as well. And that's, I think, in the last 10 years, the likes of Pascal Soriot or Mene have changed that mentality and mindset within the company, and that's why they're very science-focused.
Very quickly, I would say, I have a philosophical question, but before that, I think I completely agree that today we have a direct relationship with the industry, like we can see today with spatial transcriptomics, that we can see directly with the company and just we provide to them results, and then they, change the kits and the stuff. So I think that's something which today works pretty well if you just have the contact. But my question is about if today, with your experience, you had the choice to change, for example, all the postdocs you did just to come directly to industry, would you make this choice? And the other question is, you said that you did some, 5 postdocs?
Four
postdocs.
Yeah.
If you had at this time a position as a permanent scientist, for example, would you take it or then remove all this industry
So
stuff?
the first question, I wouldn't change anything that I did at all. I absolutely loved my time in academia and that kind of creative license to think in the way I wanted to and work with different amazing scientists. I wouldn't change any of that. And would I do a permanent position now in academia, did you say, if it came? Yeah. Now, yes, I would. I'd consider it now, after having had 12 years in industry, because that's another career as well. Maybe I've got one alternative career left in me. But no, I would consider it, because I think the landscape's changed, and I think I could also bring something different to go into academia with all the industrial experience that I've gained now. And I also see a lot more of what Jenny's talking about, and Svetlana's talking about this industry-academia mindset being not as far away from each other as it used to be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's more flexible now, isn't it?
Much more flexible, yeah.
Yes.
Any last questions? Because the reception's going to start now. So
The wine.
We want the wine.
Yeah, right. It's like guy wants a drink, so.
I want one too. You can always ask us after, can't you?
Yeah.
True, we're not scary.
yeah, well, I think it's been really, really useful, and these people are going to be around during the rest of the meeting, so just talk to them.
Unless we get very
But
tired.
thank you very much for